Okay, that should work. Morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Joseph McGuire. The name of the business is Clearsight Communications, and this is like a speed dating version of what I would normally do, um, obviously without the kissing and all of that. But what I do is I particularly work with an ancient Chinese tradition. It's a 3,000-year-old tradition of called Mian Xiong, which literally means face reading. So typically what I do is I read what's there in people's faces beyond what people are actually saying. And the understanding is that our facial features, our static facial features, reveal a huge amount of information about our personality, behavior style, how we communicate, how we receive and perceive and process information, um, and then how we externalize it, how we speak and address other people, our stress triggers and responses, health patterns, family influences, how we've been influenced both genetically and emotionally, mentally by our parents and ancestors, and a lot more besides. So I'm going to go through, as I say, a speed dating version of what I do and give you a few practical tips. But before I get into the actual thing of what I do, I don't know how many of you have come across the invisible gorilla before. Some of you are probably come across it. It refers to a particular experiment done in 1999 by two American psychologists, Chabris and Simons. And what they did was they set up a basketball game with two control groups. And the first control group had to count the number of times the team in white tops touched or passed the ball. And the second control group had to count the number of times the team in black tops touched or passed the ball. And in the middle of the game, a guy dressed in a gorilla suit walked onto the middle of the court, beat his chest several times, and walked off again. After the game, 46% of the total control group didn't believe there had been anybody in a gorilla suit anywhere near the court. And the study has been replicated on numerous occasions. And they coined the term inattentional blindness, because by and large, we don't tend to see a lot of what's actually happening in the world around us. I don't know how many of you think you see with your eyes. The answer, but if I ask you how many people see with your eyes, the answer is yes, you do and you don't. Technically speaking, the lens is part of the eye, but the eye in itself is actually effectively a lens through which images are pushed back to the visual or transmitted back to the visual cortex. By the time an image reaches the visual cortex, there's approximately 2/3 of it there and about approximately a third of it missing. And we fill in the gap based on what we expect to see rather than necessarily what's there. So unless we're actually looking attentively, we tend to miss a lot of the information that's literally available in Clearsight, which is why I picked the name for the business. And we also don't tend to see things as they are, but we see them as we are. We all tend to see the world and think through our own prism. Oscar Wilde famously said that Britain and the United States are two countries divided by a common language. So the fact that technically speaking, we're all speaking the same language doesn't mean we understand or process language in the same way. So what I'm about is helping people communicate, help people recognize how the person they're talking to, whether that's a client, a prospective client, a colleague, a business associate, a counterpart in a negotiation, or even a prospective date, how they actually receive information, how they process it, how they think, so that you can tailor your message and get your message across in the way they need to receive it, rather than in the way you naturally normally think. So it's creating a bridge between people so that we actually get the communication right, as opposed to hitting and hoping. And most of us in our lives, if not all of us here, will have had opportunities in our personal lives and in our professional lives where we simply missed the boat. No pun intended, Wendy. Where we thought we'd got our message across, we thought a deal was going to be across the table, we thought a relationship was working out, and there was miscommunication and misunderstanding somewhere. So what I'm about is helping, as I say, to bridge that gap. Some of you will probably come across this before, and it's commonly reported as being accurate that only 7% of our communication is in the spoken words. If you hear anybody say that, tell them they're talking complete nonsense. This was a specific study done in a particular context. It's been replicated on numerous occasions. It was done originally by Professor Albert Merabian in UCLA with a cohort of something like 30,000 people. And what it was about was congruency in communication. And the point of bringing it up here is that if we want to have our communication being received as being clear and honest and worth taking on board, then our spoken words, the voice, the tone, and the body language all need to be congruent. And the relevance, in particular in terms of body language, there's two particular areas I want to mention. Number one, that's what we pick up when we meet other people. They're the impressions we get before anybody speaks, from how they move, how they stand, etc., how they breathe even. And our body picks up on a lot of that. And our whole body is actually an antenna. Whether we realize it or not, we have three brains. We have a brain in the head, we have a brain in the heart, and we have a brain in the gut. And this is scientifically proven. This is not sort of abstract thinking. This has been scientifically proven. And those brains are all communicating with each other constantly. And again, the congruency between those, the alignment between those three brains is very important, because if we get that alignment right and those three brains are communicating clearly and effectively with each other, we can pick up on a lot of information that's there even without listening to what people say. And then adding in what people say, we can check whether what they're saying is actually real, whether they're just BS merchants, whether they're bluffing, or whether there's maybe a few red flags we need to pay attention to. Now, to move on to faces. As I said, this is a speed dating version, so I'm just going to touch on a few particular things, give a few particular tips, and welcome any questions then afterwards. So this is obviously Saoirse Ronan, and this is her normal face. And we tend to look at faces and we tend to think in terms of whether, obviously guys particularly tend to think in terms of whether a woman is attractive, pretty, beautiful, all of that. Obviously, there are different gender preferences as well, but we tend to see things conventionally. But if I do that, and then that, it's two right sides, two left sides, it transforms the image and it gives you a whole different picture. We form impressions of people. Again, whether we realize it, we create a story in our head when we see a face. It's not just in terms of whether it's attractive, we form an impression, an instinctive impression of the person. And the face literally tells a story. The face provides a huge, as I said, a huge amount of information, but it gives us an impression, and it gives us an impression partly based on our past observations, our past history of people. It's a reason why Hollywood uses particular actors for particular roles, because they want to convey an image of a personality, a character, a type of behavior through a particular face. And if anybody wonders whether a face really does tell a story, there's quite a transformation. And we saw perhaps quite a beautiful face there, young Michael Jackson. Probably a troubled child, judging by what one hears, but certainly a very different image later, and a very troubled man. And just simply ask yourself, what message is each of those images presenting to you? Because the latter is a much more austere face, pinched nose, which would represent a much less social being, amongst other things. But as I said, this is just giving you some very quick impressions, but I'm going to move on to the most important part of the eyes. And today, where we're seeing so many people wearing masks, so half the face is covered, we're having to rely on the top half of the face, particularly the upper part of the nose, the eyes especially, and the eyebrows. There's a lot of research now showing that where traditionally the eyebrows were regarded as almost a remnant of our ancient ancestry, which were there primarily to prevent sweat dropping into the eyes. They're now key tools for communication. So the eyebrows are very expressive, but they also reveal, again, a huge amount of information about how people receive and process information, again, amongst other things. But the eyes themselves, if you get nothing else from looking at somebody, pay particularly close attention to the eyes. a misconception that if somebody is lying to you, they're more likely to look away. Typically, a liar will actually hold eye contact and prolong the eye contact, almost partly to dominate, but also to appear more convincing. So if somebody's looking away, there's usually a reason their mind is occupied with something else, and it may have nothing to do with lying. But here, more specifically, you'll all know whose eyes these are. I've read that he actually developed this squint, having watched the Clint Eastwood character in the Fistful of Dollars series, because he thought it made him look more macho. And if you see film of Trump in his earlier years, his eyes were much more open. And there's no indication, there's no reference anywhere to him having any visual impairment. But when you see somebody appearing like this, and again, there is no visual impairment or visual impediment, and the eyes are squinting like that, it tells you that they are observing you. They are observing you in a very, very clinical manner. They are out there, their primary focus is on what can I gain from this interaction. They are not there to be emotionally open with you. So it's any given interaction with them, the primary focus for them is what can I gain and what's the business here. This is the opposite. This is a French actress, Audrey Tautou, and what you see here is obviously, and the photo is kind of slightly scrunched just to fit the screen, but what you see here is big, wide open eyes, big, bright, wide open eyes. And when you see eyes like that, which are wide open and bright, this is somebody who's person-centered. So when you meet somebody like that, the first thing that you need to do with them that's really important if you want to connect with them is to just relax and allow them to be and engage in a very easy, relaxed, sociable, friendly manner. You do not go straight into let's do business. You allow them to relax, you facilitate them in relaxing. Because again, it's about connection, it's about clarity of communication, and it's also about showing them that you have enough respect for them, that you're not pushing them to do business quickly. And that will apply whether you meet them in a business or a personal context. Also, if you're engaged with them in any type of relationship, it's important to them that you check with them how they're feeling. And not just how they're feeling emotionally, but how they're feeling about whatever it is that's going on. If it's a business deal, check how they feel about each stage of the process. And I deliberately use the word feel, not just how they think about it, how they feel about it, because feelings are what will primarily govern their responses. You'll also know these eyes, I'm sure. Former British Prime Minister Theresa May. And what you see here is the bags, the circles under the eyes, and the eyes themselves are quite dull. So you saw this progressively happening during her premiership. She started off relatively bouncy, and then over the period of a few months, her eyes became duller. The dark circles under the eyes became more and more noticeable. The eyes became more and more puffy, and you could literally see the energy being drained out of her. So if you meet somebody where there's a lot of darkness around the eyes, there's a lot of puffiness, and particularly if the eyes themselves are dull, they are very tired. So if you want to do business with them, you need to take a bit of time, because if you push them hard, you're likely to get the caveat emptor response. They may agree initially, they may want to sign initially, but when they go away and they feel they've been pushed, and even if the business has been worthwhile to them, they're likely to present how it's been done, not what has been done, but how it's been done. So the likelihood is they're going to come back and either have a lot of caveats, a lot of questions, or they may simply turn it down. So you need to take time with somebody whose eyes are like that. And you need to even check after the agreement that they're still happy. These are the eyes and eyebrows of Mitt Romney. And the reason I'm particularly mentioning or showing this image here is when you see eyebrows which sit close down underneath the eyes, over the eyes, this is a mind that works very, very quickly. And it's typically an indication of somebody who is by nature impatient. So if you want to do business with them, you need to speak fast. You need to present the information fast. Because if you present it in a very slow, plodding manner, their mind is jumping several steps ahead. They will probably interrupt you, and they will lose interest very, very quickly. If somebody else mentioned Peter Turley there earlier, and I remember a conversation with Peter sometime back in Dublin Chamber, and we're talking about eyebrows like this. But also, if the eyebrows start up above the eye and then they move down during the conversation, you've lost them. So if the eyebrows drop during the conversation, the unspoken message to you is shut up. It's my turn. So if you see that happening, zip it and allow them speak, or ask them a question so you get their views. But if you continue talking and their eyebrows have dropped, conversation's over, deal's not happening. We don't always get to see people's teeth clearly, but if you see teeth like this, where the two upper front teeth are obviously larger, and in some cases you'll find they're very obviously larger than the others, this is somebody who's by nature very stubborn, very tenacious. So if you're doing business with them, they're likely to dig their heels in. So again, you need to have your facts and your information very, very clear. You need to be patient. You need to be equally tenacious, and you need to be very confident about what the service or the product you're offering is and the value to them, because they're likely to push back and again look to get the best deal for themselves, which is fair enough, but they're likely to push harder than many others. So if you see the two upper front teeth being obviously larger than the others, stubbornness is one of the key characteristics. If you see a mouth like this, where there's a lot of lines coming down from the outer corner of the eye towards the chin, this is somebody who's experienced a lot of disappointment. And if you're doing business with them, if you're negotiating with them, they will almost expect to be disappointed by what it is you're offering, or by you, or by your service. So you're likely to have to work very hard to demonstrate the value. And I would recommend that you actually do a practical demonstration for them, not just tell them what they're likely to gain or what the benefits are likely to be. But if at all possible, give them a demonstration. So you're actually giving them tangible proof that what you're offering does what it says on the tin. Because the built-in disappointment factor is so great with them that they do need extra convincing. This is actually Joe Biden's mouth, and there's a particular reason I'm showing you this. If you see a mouth which is naturally tilted to the right like this, now he has actually had some health issues which may have impacted on this. So, but I'm using him as a specific example here. But if you see a mouth which is naturally tilted up to the right like this, and then he's not actually speaking here, that tells you that their default setting is they want to sell you something. Their automatic state of being is they're looking to convince you of something. That's very common with politicians. You'll also see it very commonly with lobbyists. So it's not that they're necessarily lying, but they're certainly likely to be very convincing and very articulate in how they speak. So I recommend you always look behind the surface of whatever it is they're saying and whatever it is they're offering. At the very least, do a double check, if not a triple check. I won't tell you whose teeth these are, but if you see teeth which are as irregular as this is somebody who's going to be emotionally unpredictable. Moods are going to be very changeable. So if you're working with them or negotiating with them or dealing with them or even meeting them in a personal context, you can expect a lot of mood swings, a lot of attitude changes, a lot of position changes. So be prepared for things to be unpredictable with such an individual. If you see A chin like this, a very pronounced square chin, and particularly with a cleft in the middle like that. This is somebody who is, again, very tenacious, very determined. A large chin tends to signify somebody who is tactile. So if you have a product that you're offering, it's actually helpful to them if you allow them to touch it. If you have a service you're offering, if you have literature, hand them the literature so they can actually touch the literature, because the tactile element of their personality is very, very strong, and being able to touch something is very reassuring for them. Also, if you notice the cleft in the chin here, they tend to love attention. So a little flattery can go a long way. I'm not talking about BS, but if you compliment them, it tends to go down very well, whether you're making them in a personal or a professional context. The particular reason I'm showing you this image is because Obama is famously left-handed. So going from faces now to talking about body language. If you see, and you will commonly see it, in fact, I recommend it as an exercise in learning to read body language. I recommend watching politicians, particularly when they're apparently being emotive in their speech. Watch the speech, watch the body language, listen to it, and then rewind and watch it with the sound off, and ask yourself, is what I've just heard congruent with the body language they're expressing? Politicians are a wonderful way to study and learn about body language. But Obama here, as I said, he's famously left-handed. So if you know which is the dominant hand, so you meet somebody and you watch how they pick up a pen or a cup of coffee. Is it their right hand or their left hand? And then the meeting gets underway and there's a point of tension, a point of stress, or simply a point of emphasis about something. And they're gesturing primarily with the opposite hand. It's not an indication necessarily that they're lying, but something is not quite kosher. So pay attention to the point that they've made when they're gesturing with the non-dominant hand, and dig a little deeper. This is the famous Usain Bolt lightning pose. And the reason I'm mentioning this is I recommend, if you haven't watched it already, a TED talk by Professor Amy Cuddy on body language and high power poses and low power poses. It's very common for people to sit or stand in postures which indicate tiredness or lack of confidence, or just general weakness, or even in some cases subservience. So I recommend, if you're going into a meeting of any description, and even going into an online meeting, that you practice a high power pose. And the research by Amy Cuddy has shown that the high power poses she demonstrates, such as an example would be this one, but this is specific for Bolt. Practicing a high power pose, even for 2 minutes at a time, lowers cortisol levels, raises testosterone levels, and allows us to feel a great deal more confident than if we hadn't done the exercise. And if we present ourselves in a way that appears confident to other people, they tend to automatically presume that we are competent. There's an unconscious association between confidence and competence. It's partly how a lot of politicians get away with things, because they know how to present themselves as appearing competent. So I recommend you develop one of the high power poses and practice it on a regular basis. And as I say, even if you're going into a virtual meeting and you're simply sitting, doing so with confidence, with relaxed confidence, communicates something to the person or the people with whom you're engaging. And the more relaxed and confident you come across as being, the easier it is for people to assume you know what you're about, and for people to actually pay constructive attention to you. Handshakes also convey a huge amount of information. I've if you look on my website, there's a post some time back on handshakes, and there are many variations in the type of handshake. Just a couple of things, a couple of ones that I'll touch on. What you're seeing here is a good firm grip, but there's several variations. Number one is the, if you like, the bone shaker, where somebody grips your hand very fiercely and very, very tight grip. And these are typically the A-type, the alpha type personalities who want to dominate and want to give a message of I am somebody special, pay attention to me. And they're also in their grip, they're also checking whether you're worth paying attention to. There's the firm handshake, which is very vigorous. So the alpha types, by the way, they want to get straight down to business, and they want to know whether you're up to their standard or not in terms of your lifestyle, your achievements, etc. What you're wearing, the type of car you drive, that's all status is very important to them. The next one, where there's the vigorous handshake, these are people for whom getting on with somebody is really important. They want to be friendly. Doesn't mean they don't want to do business, because they do, but they want to know who you are, not just what you do. They don't just want to know your title, the name of your business, etc. They want to know who you are. So if you get that vigorous handshake, and it would usually be accompanied by a big smile, be friendly with them, because if you're open to being friendly with them, again, business is more likely to happen. Just touch on one other handshake for the moment, and that's the famous wet fish handshake, which nobody likes. Now, there's one caveat with this one. You will sometimes get people who have an arthritic type condition where it's actually painful for them to shake hands, so the handshake will be very weak and tentative. But if that's not the case, and you get the so-called wet fish handshake, it is not an indication of a weak personality. It's an indication that this is somebody for whom detail is far more important than the personal connection. That they are much more detail oriented. So if you get the wet fish handshake from somebody, a little experiment you can try is you get the wet fish handshake and you take a step closer to them. What you will automatically see happen is they will step back. So personal space is important to them. You do not step in too close, and you certainly do not go for a hug with them. Because if you try to be if you're naturally very outgoing and pally, and you're naturally a hugger, and you try to hug somebody with the wet fish handshake, door closes. They're often actually appalled by the idea. So handshakes convey a huge amount of information as well. And just one other thing for now, smiling is very important. A smile conveys a huge amount of information. And again, if you're going into any business situation, whether it's an interview, a sale, a prospective sale, a negotiation, and no matter how tense it may appear to be, if you go in with a smile, it automatically tells people, this is a guy with whom I can relax, this is a guy with whom I can get on, and by extension, this is a guy with whom I can do business. They're not necessarily, they don't perceive you as a threat, and they don't perceive you as being an aggressor. Plus, if you're smiling, automatically you're changing the chemical makeup in your body, so you are more relaxed, and the more relaxed you are, the clearer it is to think effectively. The clearer it is to proceed with whatever the business of the meeting is. So practice smiling, guys. That's
well, Joseph. Thank you very much. What a fascinating presentation. I must say, thoroughly enjoyed that, and I'm sure everybody did. And I'm sure they've loads of questions. I'm just going to stop the recording there, and then I'm going to open it up for questions for people. And